They say the truth always comes out, but sometimes it needs help. Mine started with a coin, one I placed on the table right before everything collapsed. I was the guy everyone counted on, the one who always showed up, made things work, smoothed the edges. For 7 years, I built a company from scratch, kept my marriage functional, and tried to ignore the growing tension behind my wife's smile. Her name's Joanna, the kind of woman who could cry in front of a camera and have 10,000 people call her brave. Except those tears weren't for me. Not anymore. Things began to feel off around our 6th anniversary. Not loud, not obvious, just strange. Her phone was always face down. The warmth in her voice when she said my name had dulled. She started posting about healing energy and detaching from toxic patterns. And I wasn't stupid. I knew what she meant. She meant me. I asked her one night straight out, "Is there someone else?" She laughed, not nervously, but like the question was ridiculous. "Devin, you always do this. You read too much into things." She called it paranoia. I called it instinct. I wanted to believe her. God, I really did. But something inside me had already begun to break. It was a Tuesday when the call came. A friend from childhood, Travis. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but we used to be like brothers, built tree houses together, shared a dorm in college. He was the only person I ever trusted with the hard parts of my life, including Joanna. That call lasted 53 seconds, just long enough for him to say, "I didn't mean for this to happen," and then hang up. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with an old silver coin between my fingers, one Joanna and I got during our honeymoon in Maine. She called it our truth token. "If we ever doubt each other," she once said, "we put this coin on the table and talk." So I did. At 8:43 the next morning, I placed the coin on the table. No words, just a symbol. She stared at it for 3 full seconds before pushing it aside like a crumb. Then she smiled. "Are we doing this again?" Again. As if honesty was exhausting. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I asked one thing. "Is it Travis?" She paused, just long enough to answer the question without a word. And then I knew. Over the next few days, everything accelerated. She moved into the guest room. Her posts online turned cryptic, quotes about liberation, clips of her sipping wine with captions like, "Freedom tastes like this." Within a week, she'd rewritten the story. I was now the emotionally manipulative husband who wouldn't let her grow. Friends fell off, colleagues went quiet. She controlled the narrative. And Travis. He never reached out again. I could have fought, could have posted my side, but I knew better. When people choose a villain, they don't want facts, they want fire. So I disappeared. Publicly, at least. Privately, I started building something. You don't survive betrayal by screaming louder. You survive by listening. I went back through phone records, messages, transaction logs. I wasn't looking for revenge, I was looking for patterns, and they were everywhere. Payments she made with my card. Weekend trips I thought were work retreats. Lies layered so cleanly, even I wanted to believe them. But the most important thing, a device I had forgotten I installed. 2 years ago, after a burglary scare, I put a tiny, unobtrusive security camera in the living room. The app had been disabled after an update, and I never reinstalled it until now. And what it showed, on one specific night in November, shattered any illusion I had left. Travis, in my house. Laughing, barefoot, pouring wine into Joanna's glass. My wine, my glass. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was her saying, "He'll never find out. He always thinks the best of people." And then laughing, I closed the app. That was the moment something inside me clicked. Not hate, not rage. Clarity. She thought the story was hers to write, but I still had the pen. I didn't tell anyone what I saw on that recording, not at first. Not because I wanted to protect them. Those two didn't deserve shielding, but because I knew that the second I moved, it had to count. No drama, no noise, just a shift so irreversible they'd feel it before they saw it. I moved out quietly. No announcements, no online statements. One morning I just packed my laptop, clothes, passport, and left. The house, the furniture, the shared credit lines, all stayed in her name. I had built everything we owned, but she was the one who kept it. Let her have it. I took the truth. The plan wasn't revenge, it was exposure. Exposure done right, calculated, quiet, undeniable. The kind of clarity that doesn't shout, it just walks in and turns on the lights. First, I opened a new business account and funneled what little savings I had left into a clean start. I cut ties with the PR clients she'd once helped me land. Let them go. Every one of them had liked her truth posts on Instagram anyway. I wasn't going to beg for space in a room that applauded my erasure. Then came the second phase, documentation. I made copies of bank statements, timestamps, overlapping trips. I retrieved the original footage from the living room cam and clipped only what mattered. Joanna naming me a fool, Travis agreeing. I didn't touch or edit anything, no music, no narration, just raw footage with dates and context. But I didn't release it, not yet. Because truth, when dropped too early, looks like bitterness. But when timed right, it burns through denial like acid. Over the next 2 months, Joanna's online brand skyrocketed. Her series about healing after narcissistic trauma picked up sponsors. She posted filtered photos of herself holding coffee mugs with captions like, "Toxic free tastes better." Travis remained invisible, but I heard from mutual acquaintances that he'd moved into the house, the same house I'd wired money into for years, the same mortgage I was still technically co-signed on, even though I no longer had a key. I could have tried to pull financial strings, but again, I waited. People like them need a stage, and the higher they build it, the louder it crashes. What I needed was a single moment, a public contradiction so clean that even her most loyal followers couldn't ignore it. That moment came, ironically, because of her own arrogance. One morning in April, she posted a video. My truth, how I rebuilt my life after emotional abuse. I watched it twice, not because it hurt, I was past that, but because in it, she told a very specific story about the night she said she escaped my manipulation. She claimed I had thrown a glass, that I'd yelled for hours, that I blocked the door and refused to let her leave. I didn't need to say a word because I had the footage from that exact night. The coin on the table, me asking her one question, her denying it, no glass, no yelling, just me walking away. I uploaded it, not to YouTube, not to a public site. I sent it to her sponsors, quietly, attached with a note, "You have a right to know who you're aligning with. I am not asking for anything, just clarity." Within a week, her partnerships started unraveling. By week 2, she posted an apology for any confusion and went offline. And that was enough for me. But the world doesn't leave things half broken. People started talking. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years messaged me. A few apologized, most didn't. But it didn't matter. Because then Travis called. I didn't pick up the first time or the second. On the third, I let it ring 5 times before answering. His voice cracked. "Man, I didn't know how bad it got." I cut him off. "You knew enough to lie in my house." Silence. He didn't deny it. "Joanna says you're trying to ruin her," he mumbled. I laughed. "The first real one in months. No, she did that herself. I just stopped holding the rope." Then I hung up. He never called again. A week later, I received a formal email from her legal team, cease and desist for sharing private footage. I replied with 3 attachments, the property lease showing the camera was installed with consent, a signed digital form from our home security app, a copy of the footage from her channel where she showed off the camera upgrade as part of a vlog. Smiling, thanking me. The email thread went cold. After that, nothing. Just silence. No calls, no threats, no more filtered posts. And for the first time in years, peace. Not the kind you find in yoga studios or wellness retreats, the kind you earn. The kind that comes when you stop asking people to tell the truth and start showing it yourself. People assume that after exposure comes closure. Like one moment of truth is enough to erase years of deception. It's not. What comes after the truth is emptiness. A wide, quiet space where all the noise used to live. After Joanna's brand collapsed and the legal threats fizzled out, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow. Because even when justice arrives, it doesn't fill the room the same way betrayal does. It just turns the volume down. But life didn't pause for reflection. 3 weeks after the last email from her team, I got a notification from the bank. Joint mortgage account flagged for missed payment. I stared at the screen. It wasn't just my name on the document, it was still our house, the one she kept, the one Travis moved into, the one I walked away from. But the bank didn't care who decorated the walls or changed the locks. They wanted a signature, a payment. Mine. I had 2 choices: let the account slide and ruin my credit, or pay for a home I hadn't stepped inside in over 6 months. I picked a third option. I called the bank, explained the situation, sent every document proving I'd moved out, pushed for disassociation from the loan. The process dragged. They needed notarized forms, proof of relocation, a statement from her. Joanna didn't respond to the requests. So I filed a formal liability dispute and braced for damage. Around the same time, something else happened. An old client of mine, someone who dropped me when Joanna went public with her narrative, reached out. Her name was Lara, a real estate developer I'd helped with branding 2 years ago. Her message was short. "I saw what happened. I misjudged you. Let's meet." I didn't expect anything from it, but I agreed. We sat down for coffee, and she didn't ask about Joanna or the video. She asked about my work, my plans, my next move. "I'm not looking to climb back," I told her. "I just want something clean." She nodded. "Then help me build something new. No drama, just vision." That meeting turned into a contract. The contract became a partnership. And for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't rebuilding my life from rubble. I was building it from choice. But even as things started to shift, reminders still arrived. One afternoon, I got a voicemail from a blocked number. I didn't recognize the voice at first. "Devin, it's Joanna's mum." She sounded tired, heavy, like she had waited too long to speak and now didn't know where to begin. "I know I don't have the right, but I thought you should know. Joanna's not doing well. Travis left. She's saying it's your fault." I let the message finish, then deleted it. It wasn't cruelty, it was protection, because what she wanted wasn't healing. It was another lifeline, another soft landing, and I was done being that. A week later, I received a handwritten letter. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. "Joanna," the letter was 3 pages long. It didn't start with an apology. It started with a defense. She blamed stress, fear, childhood wounds. She mentioned the coin on the table. She said she never thought I'd actually walk away from everything. Then she said the line that stuck. "I didn't think you'd stop loving me. That's what it had always been, not love, power." She loved the version of me that tolerated, that absorbed, that held her weight when she didn't want to carry it herself. The version that stayed silent. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I no longer opened. That same week, I launched my first independent project with Lara's team. It was small but meaningful, a platform for underrepresented founders to tell their stories without having to shape them into marketing soundbites. No filters, no edits, just truth. A few days later, I was invited to speak on a panel about resilience in entrepreneurship. I almost said no, but then I thought about how many times I had let someone else control the narrative. I thought about the nights I'd stared at a blank ceiling, wondering how I became the villain in someone else's redemption arc. So I said yes. I stood on that stage with zero PR training, no polished anecdotes, just one sentence that opened everything. I used to think silence was strength. Now I know it's consent. After the event, a man in his 40s came up to me, said his ex-wife did something similar, turned his quiet into guilt, made him believe that loving too hard was the same as controlling. He didn't need advice, he just needed someone to say, "Me too." That night, I walked home and opened my laptop. I searched the term emotional erasure. The articles were few, mostly buried under topics about gaslighting or manipulation in romantic relationships. But what I wanted to find was something else, a conversation not about pain, but about rebuilding without apology. So I started writing, not about Joanna, not about Travis, not even about betrayal, about recovery, ownership, choosing to exist outside of someone else's version of events. Because people like Joanna rely on one thing, your silence, break it, and their story falls apart. By summer, the dust had mostly settled. The drama, the fallout, the silence, all of it had formed a kind of perimeter around my life, and inside that perimeter, I could finally breathe. But something strange happens when people stop needing you to play the villain. They start trying to pull you back in as the hero. First, it was an email from Joanna's sister. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. The subject line was harmless. Just wanted to say hi. But the body of the message told the truth. "I think she misses you. She won't admit it, but she's different now. Quiet, maybe lonely. You meant more than she let on." I didn't reply. Then Travis reached out, again. This time it was a social media message, short, almost childlike. "I messed up. I know it's late, but I wanted to say it. You didn't deserve any of that." I blocked him. None of this surprised me. When people burn the bridge and realize the other side isn't what they thought it would be, they often return with buckets of water, hoping you'll help them rebuild. But this wasn't about rebuilding. It was about protecting the foundation I'd finally laid alone. Still, something lingered, not pain, not anger, but memory. One day in July, I found the coin again, the one I'd placed on the table that morning when everything shifted. It was wedged in the bottom of a drawer, stuck behind some old receipts and a spare USB drive. I held it in my palm for a long time, not because I missed her, but because I remembered what it used to mean. The truth is, I didn't just walk away from Joanna, I walked away from who I had been around her, the over-accommodator, the fixer, the absorber, the man who confused silence with peace. It's a hard thing, realizing that the version of yourself you were most praised for is also the one that allowed the most damage. That realization became the turning point in a new chapter I hadn't even planned on writing. It started with a message from Lara, again. Her company was hosting a mentorship weekend for new entrepreneurs, mostly women, mostly first-generation founders. She wanted me to speak, not just about branding or business, but about something more personal. Resilience, she said, but the real kind. I didn't say yes right away. Part of me still questioned what I had to offer, but another part, quieter and stronger, knew that if I kept dodging spaces where truth could live, I'd eventually retreat into silence again. So I agreed. On the first day of the event, I met a woman named Renee. She was in her early 30s, building a tech platform for women exiting emotionally manipulative relationships. Not the kind that made headlines, the kind that made you question your own sanity in small daily ways. We spoke during a coffee break. She asked me why I agreed to speak. I told her the truth, because I kept waiting for someone to say the things I needed to hear a year ago, and no one ever did. So I guess I decided, I'll be that person for someone else. She nodded, didn't blink. Then she said, "You already are." That moment didn't fix anything, but it validated everything. The work, the silence, the boundaries, the rebuilding. It meant something beyond me now. It wasn't just my story. It was part of a larger thread, one stitched by people who'd survived erasure and came back louder, wiser, and more grounded. After that event, I finally opened the draft I'd been avoiding, the personal essay I started months ago but never finished, the one about the coin, the table, the voice I'd almost lost. I edited it, shaped it, stripped it of bitterness, but kept every ounce of truth. Then I submitted it to a digital magazine that focused on real-life recovery stories. They published it within a week. The article went viral, not celebrity viral, but real viral. Thousands of comments, hundreds of messages, dozens of stories from men who said they'd gone through the same thing. And that was the twist I never saw coming, because for so long I'd been led to believe I was alone in it. That the shame, the manipulation, the slow erasure was unique to me. But it wasn't. It was just unspoken. I was no longer invisible, and I wasn't the only one. Weeks later, I received a message from a man in his 50s, married 20 years. Said he thought he was crazy for how often his wife flipped stories, made him question his memory, told their kids he was fragile. Then he read my piece. He ended the message with, "Thank you for reminding me I'm not insane, just unheard." After that, I knew this was bigger than Joanna, bigger than betrayal. It was about voice and finally using mine. So I launched something I never thought I would, a podcast. Not about revenge, not about bitterness, about reclamation, about the space that opens up when you stop begging people to see your worth and start seeing it yourself. I called it the coin on the table, because sometimes truth doesn't shout, it just waits until you're ready to speak it. 3 months had passed since I last heard her voice, and yet her presence lingered, not in memory, but in logistics. Joanna had vanished from my daily life, but not from the paperwork, the signatures, the digital remnants of a life once shared. Some ties don't break on emotion, they expire on documentation. That was the part no one talks about. Not the heartbreak, but the bureaucracy that follows betrayal. I spent hours on hold with banks, refinancing the loan she abandoned when the sponsors disappeared. I hired a legal assistant to help detach our names from shared properties. I filled out forms, printed records, signed affidavits, swearing I was no longer responsible for the life she left behind. She hadn't paid a dime since March. The house she fought to keep was now 2 payments behind. I let the bank handle it. I wasn't rescuing it again. I wasn't rescuing her again. It was in those weeks, dry, administrative, frustratingly dull, that I finally saw what this really was. This wasn't a love story that ended, it was a business deal that collapsed. Joanna had treated our marriage like a startup. She used it for leverage, visibility, sympathy, and reach. And when it stopped serving her image, she pivoted, burned the brand, started over. That realization didn't hurt, it clarified. I stopped asking emotional questions and started making executive decisions. Around that time, my podcast, The Coin on the Table, started gaining traction. At first, I kept it simple. 1 episode a week. Real stories. Real men. Not victims. Not perfect, just honest. We talked about accountability, emotional gaslighting, how silence had become our most fluent language. The comment section wasn't huge, but it was steady. Men wrote in from across the country, divorced, broken, rebuilding. They didn't want revenge. They wanted proof that their pain wasn't invisible. By week 7, we had our first guest, a former firefighter from Colorado, said his wife manipulated custody hearings so efficiently that he didn't see his son for 2 years. He never raised his voice, never hit back, never fought dirty. That was the problem. No one believed him because he was calm. His episode went viral. We didn't ask for it. It just happened. Maybe because people were tired of one-sided stories. Maybe because his voice cracked when he said, "I wasn't dangerous, I was just erased." After that, everything accelerated. More submissions, more messages, more conversations from men who never thought they'd speak their stories aloud. That's when it hit me. This wasn't content. This was a ledger, a public record of all the things we weren't supposed to feel, not because we weren't capable, but because no one expected us to admit it. It made me rethink my own silence. So I sat down and recorded an episode I hadn't planned on making. Episode 10, The Woman Who Named Me Broken. I didn't say Joanna's name. I didn't need to. I walked listeners through how things looked from the inside, the slow withdrawal of affection, the rewritten narratives, the gaslit arguments where I left feeling guilty for asking a simple question. And then I said something I hadn't said out loud before. She didn't destroy me. She recruited me into my own disappearance. The messages came fast after that episode. One guy said his ex told him crying was manipulation. Another said he paid for his wife's grad school while she cheated with her advisor. One wrote, "She didn't hate me, she just needed me quiet so she could be the story." I didn't respond to most of them, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want the podcast to become a support group. This wasn't therapy, this was testimony. But one message stopped me cold. It was from Joanna's cousin, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Just heard episode 10. I always wondered what really happened between you two. She made you sound like a ticking bomb. Now I know why I never saw the smoke. I read it twice, then closed my phone, not out of emotion, out of finality, because that was the first time someone from her side admitted it. The illusion had finally cracked. A week later, the house was officially out of both our names, sold, foreclosed. I never saw $1 from it, but I didn't care. It was a chain, not an asset. The bank sent a final notice. I printed it and filed it in a folder labeled Closure, not poetic, just functional. That same day, Joanna posted something online for the first time in months. A long, cryptic caption, a photo of a beach, words like healing and rebirth. No mention of the past, no responsibility, just rebranding. She'd returned to the same formula, new aesthetic, same evasion, but this time I didn't flinch, because her story no longer required my silence to survive. I had built something of my own, not bigger, not louder, just true. Sometimes moving on doesn't feel like progress. It feels like waiting. Waiting for the next reminder to arrive. Waiting for the next apology that never comes. Waiting to see if your silence will echo or disappear. But eventually, waiting gives way to clarity. And in my case, that clarity came on a Tuesday morning with a single message. She mentioned you in a podcast. The text came from a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. No context, just that line. I didn't click the link right away. I let it sit in my inbox like a stone at the bottom of a river. I already knew what kind of spin she'd take. I'd lived in the shadow of her narratives long enough to predict the rhythm. Joanna was starting over, again. New platform, new voice, same strategy. I finally opened the episode later that evening, more curious than wounded. Her voice hadn't changed, still controlled, still careful. The episode was titled Lessons from Letting Go. At first she was vague, referenced a past relationship that taught her about boundaries, communication, emotional labor. She said she'd learned how important it was to walk away when a situation no longer served growth. Then came the part that made my jaw tighten. Some people thrive in silence because the truth would expose their own harm. There it was, the twist, the suggestion that I'd only told my story because I was hiding something darker. No names, no direct accusations, just enough implication to let her audience fill in the blanks. But I didn't react. I didn't respond, because by now I understood the most powerful thing you can do with someone who manipulates truth is not defend yourself, but continue telling your own without apology. The next episode of The Coin on the Table dropped 2 days later. I didn't change my plan, didn't reference her. I told a new story about a man who spent a decade trying to earn his father's approval, only to realize the approval he wanted was never coming. The episode was about release, not revenge. The comment section filled with men who saw themselves in it, and none of them mentioned Joanna. That's when I knew. Her voice might still be loud, but it no longer controlled the volume in my life. Around that time, something unexpected happened. I received an email from a university in Chicago. A gender studies professor had assigned one of my episodes as part of a seminar on narrative ownership. She asked if I'd be open to a guest Q&A. I hesitated. I wasn't a scholar. I didn't have degrees in psychology or sociology. I wasn't an expert. Just a man who stopped apologizing for being emotionally fluent. But I agreed. The class was small, maybe 20 students, half of them silent for most of the hour. One of the few who spoke was a woman named Nadia. She asked, "Do you think you were ever complicit in the version of you she created?" It wasn't a hostile question, it was honest, and I gave her the only honest answer I had. Yes, I enabled it. I mistook compliance for peace. I didn't correct the story because I didn't think anyone would believe mine. That's on me. That was the moment the room shifted, because people don't expect accountability to arrive without defense. They expect excuses. And when you give them truth instead, something changes. After the session, the professor thanked me, said the conversation opened a new layer of dialogue for the class, about emotional labor, public narratives, and how silence can sometimes look like guilt when you've never been taught to speak. I walked away from that call feeling something I hadn't in years, legitimacy, not as someone who'd been hurt, as someone who had learned. Later that week, I got a voice message from Lara, my business partner. She'd been watching everything unfold, quietly cheering but not interfering. "Proud of what you built," she said, "and proud you didn't burn the place down to do it." She didn't have to elaborate. She knew what she meant. So did I. There had been so many chances to retaliate, so many moments I could have exposed Joanna in deeper, more humiliating ways. But I never touched private photos, never leaked texts, never named names. I didn't need to, because the truth didn't need dramatics, it just needed consistency. By the end of the month, the coin on the table hit 100,000 downloads, small by platform standards, but massive for a project that started in my living room with a second-hand mic and a single coin. A coin that used to represent trust between two people. Now it represented something else, a boundary, a line, a record. And then, right on cue, Joanna reached out again. This time it wasn't a message or a call, it was a comment. Public. On an unrelated post about storytelling ethics, she wrote, "Some people weaponize half-truths to build platforms. I just hope their audience knows how to ask better questions." It was bait, not subtle, not clever, just tired. I didn't reply, didn't delete it, didn't hide it. Because it spoke for itself. My next episode was already written. It was about how some people learn to lie, not because they enjoy deception, but because the truth demands accountability they're unwilling to meet. No names, no finger-pointing, just a reflection, because that's all this ever was. A man, a coin, and a table where the truth finally had a place to sit. The night. The coin on the table hit its 1-year mark. I didn't throw a party. I didn't post a milestone reel or thank the algorithm. I just sat with the numbers, the episodes, the inbox filled with stories I never asked for but now carried. It started with a coin. Now it was a record. But success has a strange way of reawakening the people who tried to bury you. The next message wasn't from Joanna. It was from her attorney. A different one this time, less aggressive, more careful. Subject line, proposal for amicable settlement and content boundary agreement. No lawsuit, no cease and desist, just negotiation. Apparently, her brand was in talks with a publishing house, a memoir. She was rebranding again, this time as a redemption arc. The woman who lost everything and found herself, and her team wanted to avoid potential overlap with the narrative I'd already made public. Translation: she wanted permission to write her version without being contradicted by mine. They even offered a payout, a quiet, sealed agreement that would prevent me from further exploring content related to our history. It wasn't a lot of money, enough to acknowledge disruption, not enough to justify silence. I didn't respond. Not because I was above the conversation, but because the fact that she even asked confirmed everything I already knew. For years she wrote the story. Now she wanted ownership of silence too. A week later, I addressed it on the podcast. No names, no drama. Just a single statement in the final 5 minutes of the episode. If someone offers you money to mute your experience, ask why your voice threatens theirs. The episode became the most downloaded one we'd ever released. It wasn't about exposure anymore, it was about boundaries. The kind I used to violate myself by constantly explaining, justifying, shrinking. I didn't shrink anymore, neither did the people who listened. One man wrote in to say he'd started therapy after 15 years of brushing off emotional manipulation. Another said he finally left a job where his boss gaslighted him into thinking he was the problem. One message simply said, "You made me remember I'm not disposable." That was the point. It was never about Joanna. It was about the parts of ourselves we give away in exchange for approval, and the long road back when we realized no one's handing them back. Months passed. The podcast grew. I got offers from studios, invitations to speak, collaborations I used to dream about when all I had was a microphone and silence. But the real turning point came on an ordinary Thursday. I received a handwritten letter in the mail. No name on the envelope, no return address. But I knew the handwriting immediately. It was from Joanna's mother. Inside were 3 lines. "I've listened to your podcast. I believed her version for too long. I'm sorry I helped erase you." No defense, no deflection, just accountability. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't forgive her instantly. I didn't frame the letter or post it online. I just let it sit. Because some apologies aren't meant to fix the past. They're meant to release the pressure that held it together. A few weeks later, I got another email from the publisher working with Joanna. Different tone this time, no legal language, just a request for clarity. They wanted to know if I was planning to write my own book. At first, I said no. I had the podcast, the archive, the coin. But then I thought about what happens when people only hear one side, polished and packaged for mass appeal. I thought about how long I waited for someone else to tell my story with care, and I realized they never will. So I started writing, not to respond to her, not to compete with her, to finish my story. And I made one rule: no erasure, no changing timelines to look better, no scrubbing the parts where I stayed too long, said too little, acted too small. If I was going to put it on paper, it had to be real. By the time fall arrived, the first draft was done. I printed it and held the pages in my hands. Not as proof, as record. For the first time in my life, I had put everything in one place, not to be believed, but to be known. That's what erasure steals from you, not your reputation, your selfhood. Now I had it back. I never sent a response to Joanna's team, never signed anything. The silence between us was no longer fragile, it was final. I kept the coin, not as a symbol of trust, but of turning. The day I placed it on the table, everything shifted, and instead of trying to hold what was breaking, I let go. The break became the story became the truth, and the truth, finally, was mine to keep. I thought the story ended when I finished the book, but sometimes closure doesn't mean finality, it just means you're no longer holding the pen for anyone else. 2 months after I submitted the manuscript, I got a message from Junior, the intern who helped with podcast editing. He forwarded a link with a note that just said, "Thought you'd want to see this." The link led to a video. Joanna on stage, reading an excerpt from her book at a local literary festival. Same voice, same cadence, different title. She built herself from silence. I didn't watch the whole thing, just enough to catch the premise. She'd repositioned herself not as the victim of one relationship, but of many. The misunderstood woman, the scapegoated empath, the one who tried too hard to love broken men. I wasn't angry, I wasn't even surprised. It was the same script, reshuffled. But this time, the audience clapped less. The comments were mixed. One even said, "Something about this feels like performance, not reflection." And that's when I understood. When you fake growth, real people can feel the gap. Meanwhile, I was living the quiet version of something real. The podcast had become a full-time platform. We launched a mentorship program for men navigating post-divorce trauma. Not therapy, just structure. Financial literacy, co-parenting strategies, rebuilding confidence after reputational ruin. The stories that came in weren't spectacular, they were ordinary, which made them powerful. A man whose wife emptied their joint savings before filing for divorce, then told the kids he never contributed. A teacher who spent 5 years being shamed for his emotional detachment, only to realize he'd been walking on eggshells around someone who rewrote arguments in real time. These weren't angry men, they were unheard ones, and now they had a space. We didn't offer solutions, we offered mirrors, and sometimes that's enough. But what I didn't expect was what came next. A letter from Travis typed 3 paragraphs delivered to my business P.O. box. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to rewrite anything. He just said, "I was a coward, not because I betrayed you, because I kept letting her tell me what version of you to believe." I read it twice, then filed it under a folder I'd created years ago. Unsent. Letters like that aren't for reopening conversations, they're for acknowledging endings. A month later, I visited a high school in Austin to speak to a senior media class about narrative responsibility. It was part of a broader campaign we launched about digital storytelling, how online stories shape offline consequences. One student asked me, "How do you know when you've healed?" I didn't have a rehearsed answer, I just told the truth, when you can tell the story without needing anyone else to lose. The room went still. Then someone nodded, and I realized I meant it. Healing wasn't loud, it wasn't linear, it wasn't even satisfying, it was just consistent. It showed up in small choices, like turning down an interview with a gossip site that wanted the messy version, like declining a second printing deal from a publisher who asked if I could name names this time, like choosing not to check Joanna's socials anymore, even when I knew she'd posted something designed to provoke. And then, something happened I hadn't anticipated. Joanna's book flopped, not because I interfered, because people recognized surface when they were looking for substance. She posted a video about burnout, took an extended break, her podcast went quiet, her brand faded into static, and still I said nothing, not out of grace, out of discipline, because not every fall is yours to narrate. Months passed, I moved into a new place, different city, different rhythm. Not to run, but to start again without the old echoes in every hallway. We hosted our first live recording of The Coin on the Table in a converted community space downtown. Seats, everyone filled. One of the guests was a man who'd lost custody of his kids for 3 years due to false claims. He said he spent that time writing letters he couldn't send, just to remind himself he still had a voice. He ended his story with, "Now I speak, so they never forget I'm real." And that hit me harder than anything I'd heard all year. After the event, someone approached me, a woman in her late 30s. She said her brother had gone through something similar. She followed the podcast from the start, said it helped her see him differently. He always said no one believed him because he didn't fight back. Now I understand he wasn't weak. He was trying to protect himself from becoming someone else's version of the villain. I thanked her, not because I needed the praise, but because I knew what it meant for her to say that out loud. By winter, the book was picked up by a small imprint that specialized in first-person narratives about men's emotional recovery. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest, and that's what mattered. The final chapter wasn't about Joanna or Travis or even the podcast. It was about choosing to live fully in a life not built around correction. I still kept the coin, not as a symbol of what was lost, but as a reminder. Some stories don't break you, they just return you to yourself.